My name is Chris Horton, and I'm a historian, researcher, writer and explorer of the unknown. My style is very old school, but with courtesy and respect for the dead. My work takes me to undiscovered places, hidden realms and ancient spaces, which are hitherto unknown to the modern world or seldomly explored. These mostly forgotten relics of tales yet to be shared and dark secrets rarely shown. As a former police detective, I have no fear of the dead, but a respect and a willingness to learn and share, as you join me on another journey back into the shadows of time and to those that passed before us. And as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, the remains of Potsford gibbet. This was a place in April 1699 where a double murderer by the name of Jonas Snell was executed and later hung here, and here he remained for 40 years. And over that period of time, a notorious history of haunting and strange occurrences have frequented this particular district. I came here a few years ago and I gave an in-depth background to the crime committed by Jonas Snell, a double murder with an axe, and of course the trial and retribution. Today my story takes me back to 17th century England, in fact on the 10th of February 1698. On this date, John Bullard Sr. and his son John Bullard Jr. were millers working on their accounts at Leveringham Watermill, but were both murdered by their servant Jonas Snell, a journeyman working temporarily at the mill. The reasons for this terrible crime are lost in the annals of time. Perhaps it was overpay, as Snell was employed on a temporary basis, or perhaps not at all. But Snell brutalized and bloodied them with an axe and then hung their bodies upside down from a beam. Whether they were still alive at this point is not known, but the scene of the crime must have been covered in blood from where Snell had butchered them to death. Snell attempted to evade justice, but was later apprehended, still carrying the murder weapon coated in his victim's blood. He was remanded to custody for a date to be set in 1699, where he would appear before a court to face the charges of a double murder. In April of that year, Jonas Snell was judged by trial and jury at the Market Sessions Court behind me at the Manor House here in Wickham Market, which sits in front of the Market Square, where he was judged to be guilty of both double murders of John Bullard Sr. and Jr. Jonas Snell, I therefore sentence you to hang by the neck until you are dead, and may the Lord have mercy on your soul. The remains of Jonas Snell were encased in chains and hung from what originally stood as a crossbar gibbet, where the body remained in situ until the year 1740, where it eventually was taken down and presumably was buried somewhere in the vicinity. There used to be a large stone which originally stood outside the post, where apparently if people put their foot on it, it used to vibrate. But unfortunately that legend can't be tested because the stone has long since disappeared. But what we have here is some remnant of a crime and punishment which took place all those centuries before. One can imagine, after such a terrible deed had been committed by Jonas Snell, and even perhaps more terrible, the fact to exhibit his remains in a public place on a main busy thoroughfare where people, women and children, let alone adult men, would wander past on a daily basis to look at the skeletal remains of Jonas Snell slowly rotting away as birds were pecking at his flesh as it slowly dissolved and returned to nature, and just leaving this skeletal state. In fact, one of the earliest reports of hauntings here actually occurred in the year 1740, just prior to it actually being removed. a local freethinker and rationalist, a local tailor by the name of James Gore, just happened to pass by here on his way to do a day's work at Leveringham farmhouse, when he espied the remains of Jonah Snell hanging from those chains from the top of the gibbet. And sarcastically, not believing in the paranormal, Mr. Gore remarked to the remains of Jonah Snell, "Ah, old fellow, would it be strange if thou was to come down from there?" And no doubt with a chuckle, he made his way on to complete his task. He returned a little before dusk and discovered to his shock, horror and dismay that the gibbet was empty. There were no chains, there was no remains of Jonah Snell, just the wooden frame of the gibbet before him. Obviously, being a free thinker and rationalist, he would at first thought that perhaps someone had finally come along to cut down this poor specimen and bury him somewhere in the locality. But as he walked away, in the distance, he could hear very slowly, but quite deliberately, the sound of clanking chains. And the clanking of those chains grew louder and louder, which caused him to break into a sweat and perhaps in panic to walk in a much faster pace. But the faster he moved, the quicker he moved, the deeper he breathed for his breath, the chains grew louder and louder before eventually breaking out into full flight and running for his life back to his home, where he eventually collapsed to his doorstep in front of his wife and told her of the horrible aberrations that he experienced whilst passing the Potsford gibbet. I arrived here about an hour ago and just wandering around, I'm not actually feeling anything at this moment in time. There's a lot of traffic coming from a nearby road. It's a very, very busy road. In fact, on occasions people have used this as a very convenient country toilet on their travels to wherever they were planning to go from or to in the past. And many people have been frightened coming in here late at night. Well, I'm not surprised. There's a very heavy woodland behind me, and to come across this iron cage which is surrounding this particular post, upon which is the legend of Jonah Snell, must be quite a sight for anybody not familiar with this countryside. Well, anyway, for tonight I brought with me Eddie. Eddie's agreed to come along and give a hand with this investigation. He's never been here during the night. He's been here during the day. He picked up some vibes last time, but he will give you his account of what he's feeling here at the moment as I speak. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the man in the red Ferrari jacket. I know actually in the past people have complained to me about Eddie's mode of appearance wearing a Ferrari jacket. If you want to club together to buy him a really expensive jacket to wear on his investigations, that would be absolutely wonderful. But in the interim, we're actually outside Potsford gibbet itself. Eddie arrived with me a while back and obviously has got some impressions upon what he's picking up here tonight. What are you actually feeling?
First of all, I will just say the reason why I wear the Ferrari jacket is because it's warm. It's the warmest jacket I've got. But what am I picking up since I've been here? Yeah. Slight headache, nothing more.
Yeah, it's not very intense at all, is it? It's very lightweight.
Headache.
Single headache.
Yeah. It's every so often you'll sort of come in and then it'll go out. And it's sort of like waiting to see what happened a little bit later on. Last time I came here by daytime, that was quite interesting. Came walking down the trackway, and straight away you noticed no sounds of birds calling. So it's sort of like, wow. When I came through the actual trackway tonight, got some pigeons flying.
Well, I heard pigeons here last time I was here.
But only about 20 yards in. After that, nothing. Not in this area.
What Eddie is saying is that on some locations that we've been to, particularly areas that are drenched in a lot of evil, it has been known that wildlife won't frequent those particular locations, that they will avoid them at all possible costs.
That's correct.
An example of which, of course, would be the Nazi concentration camp at Auschwitz in Poland. It is said that no birds are seen or or actually noticed a seeing or flying through that particular area. Again, it's like many of these stories which perhaps are partly apocryphal. In the case of Auschwitz, I know for a fact that birds had been heard to sing and fly across there, but I think it's the sentiment that carries more weight than actual fact. Now, with regard to what Eddie is saying tonight, who knows, perhaps there is something here that drives away the wildlife, but I haven't personally experienced that myself, although I can't recall from when I was last here during the day whether or not there was much wildlife present in any case. But regardless, we are going to carry out a first-class investigation of Potsford gibbet, and hopefully we'll have something really wonderful to share with you. Any last words very quickly?
Hopefully we get something good.
Okay, well, now we're going to commence with our investigation, and if anybody notices of anything of any particular interest, please make a note that something that I may have missed and let me know on Facebook. But in the interim, let's continue with the investigation of Jonah Snell and Potsford gibbet. Okay, we've now got ourselves ready, all our equipment is in place. Eddie has the camera locked off facing down the old trackway, or which used to be the original roadway, and Eddie's holding the camcorder as we're standing by the gibbet. It's very noisy here, I have to say. First of all, there's a country lane, a two-lane country road, but it's very busy. It actually takes a lot of traffic into nearby Wickham Market, so we're going to get some degree of noise interference. Now, the question obviously that anyone would ask me, what am I feeling now? I can certainly sense an energy behind me. Now, whether this is psychological or whether this is something to do with what I'm actually feeling on the spiritual level is difficult to say. But I can say that there is an energy here and I can feel it now. It's not very strong, but it's there. It's the impression of somebody standing next to me. It's quite a weird feeling. Not something that I can actually put into words very easily, but I'm certainly sensing the presence of someone or something. Okay, I'm going to open up to spirit. Okay, Jonah, I came here, I believe, 2 to 3 years ago, where we made a level of contact with you. I've read about the trial that you experienced, the things that you went through, and how you were executed. I don't know what the degree of evidence that really existed against you. I don't know whether you were an innocent person who was framed for somebody else's indulgences, or whether in fact you were as guilty as charged. On a personal level, I find a very brutal way of reinforcing punishment for those that stepped out of line. But then of course we're looking at a period of history in 1699 where people still believed in the forces of the devil, they believed in witches, and people were generally very superstitious. So the remains of Jonah Snell being here certainly generated a lot of allegations of paranormal activity and activities which have been recorded over the years since. I don't know whether or not Jonah is actually buried here. There's a number of holes that have been dug in the ground. I would venture to suggest that he isn't here and that people have been digging the ground over. I think his bones probably went over 150 years ago when people started to develop interest in necromancy. But his presence is still here. This is where he was displayed for all of those years. So Jonah, I'm not sympathetic or unsympathetic. I just wish to make a level of peaceful contact. Now next to your light there, as I said that I'm not trying to be sympathetic or unsympathetic. Actually, I was looking at this point here and there was a white flash of light that came off here. Very strong spark of white light.
From the K2?
Yeah, from here.
I'm feeling anger.
Yeah, very strong spark of white light. Okay, now I'm just going to go back to opening up again. Jonah, could you give us an indication, please, other than the light I just saw, and I'm very grateful to see that, but can you give us an indication, please, of your presence? last time we heard the clanking of chains. I don't know whether that is something that you do to give an indication. Please don't think we're treating you like some exhibit inside some kind of spiritual zoo, because you're not. We've come here because both of us have an interest in the afterlife, and both of us want to get to the bottom of your alleged crimes and how you were treated by the state as a consequence.
This anger is getting so strong. Severe anger.
Please, could you give us an indication, please, Jonah? Still here. I'm feeling the energy here.
Can you feel that anger?
I'm feeling energy here, which is coincidentally the same place I saw the white spark. Now, I appreciate anyone listening to that comment and observation from me would say, well, that's ridiculous, because if you see a white spark of light and then claim that there's something next to it, then obviously that we need a degree of proof, a level of proof. I can't give that. I can only relate to you on camera. I can only relate to you what I'm actually experiencing. And we're next to the woodland, and in the woodland there's always been an attachment for spiritual activity there. It's hard to imagine that we're on a 17th century road that's still here, that hasn't changed in all of the centuries. It originally would have been a mud track, and it is still a mud track. I'm not sure when these iron railings were erected, but I can assume probably in the last 80 years.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of fairly modern. Basically try and keep people out, I think.
I'm not hearing anything, but then I'm not hearing anything because there's a lot of traffic. But Jonah, please could you give us an indication? Are the Bullards here in spirit? Because you would have been connected to Jonah Snell, John Bullard Senior and Junior, father and son. You were witness to the crime that took place upon you. Was the miscreant, the man responsible for this brutal murder, was he in fact Jonah Snell? Or was there somebody else who was involved? I mean, Jonah, are you an innocent or are you guilty? Can you give us some indication of that, please? I'm not trying to be forceful or threatening. I'm just trying to extrapolate from you the facts surrounding this particular case and the terrible dark deeds which have taken place over those years.
Did your tummy just go?
Yeah, it did, yeah.
It did.
It's kind of ironic when you look back at history, when you look at country records. The courts, for example, would have been dealing with peasant thieves, poachers, all kinds of people for petty crimes.
Absolutely.
But the murders and the real serious crimes which have taken place in the past, they've always been referenced in big characters, because whenever you research any particular district, it will always throw up any kind of notoriety attached to the area, particularly with murders, and particularly with murders that have taken place over 300 or 400 years ago. And this particular case is a case in point. There's a lot of information about it, but very little evidence to actually prove conclusively by modern standards that Jonah Snell was guilty. There were no witnesses at the scene of the crime.
Just want to have a quick circle around, Chris, because I'm getting something here, and it's strong. Okay, nothing shown on camera, but wow.
Could you make, I have this device here. This is a, we call it an EMF meter, and if you walk through it or attach your energy to it, the lights will flash like this. Could you make this light work? Jonah, could you give us an indication please, using these lights? Could you make them flash?
Let's come close to it.
Can you step into the light, as it were, and make the lights flash please, Jonah? There's nothing evil about any of these devices. This is technology which you didn't have in your period of history, but exists now. But what I'm holding in my hand, if you walked through this or touched it, the lights would flash and give us an indication that you're here. Could you do so please? What I'm going to do is place this here.
No, once that hold like that, it's have to be flat. Unfortunately, really.
Inside.
I tell you what.
That's okay, leave it where it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Jonah, could you give us an indication please? Could you make the lights flash?
Go close to it. Just put your hand over it.
Please, Jonah, you can do this. At least people will know conclusively that you're here and that you'll always be here. Could you not step into the light? I feel a lot of hurt here and a lot of pain emotionally.
I got so much anger. So much anger.
Please, Jonah, could you make the lights flash? You can use my energy or Eddie's energy to draw the power through to do this.
If I was to tell the truth, I think he was innocent.
If you were innocent, could you cause the lights to flash, please, Jonah? If you clearly did not murder the Bullards at Letheringham Watermill, could you make these lights flash? Okay, I pitched the same question slightly differently perhaps. If you were guilty of these two murders, could you make the lights flash? I'm not here to cast recriminations upon you. I just want to know why you did it and what the circumstances, whether you were bullied and threatened by them and treated badly, whether they did something to you which caused you to snap and you committed this murder. But the only way we can verify any of this is for you to cooperate, and by cooperating is to make these lights flash. So are you completely innocent of the crimes that you were committed to trial and were judged guilty for? Can you make the lights flash if you are guilty? You can do this. I'll keep my fingers clear of the button. If you were innocent, could you make these lights flash to show that you are innocent? You never committed these two murders. Okay, let's look at a third option. You didn't physically commit the murders, but you were present when somebody else committed these murders. Would that be correct? If so, could you make the lights flash, please? all you need to do is walk into the light. All you need to do is walk to this. I'll put it on here. If you don't want to get too close to any of us two, I will place this back here where it was before. And I will step back. And Eddie will video you. If you're here, Jonah, could you make that light flash, please?
Was there anybody in this case did anything to do with Chris Reeve? So I'm getting the name Chris Reeve.
Any friendly spirits, including Jonah Snell, could you give us an indication, please, of your presence? Could you make these lights flash on this electronic device, which is currently sat on the railings around the remains of the Potsford gibbet? Or anybody at all in spirit who is here? Are there people here who shouldn't be here? Are there people here who are buried, who are not known?
Is there a Chris Reeve here? Don't know why I'm getting that name, but it's so strong.
I'm feeling something really big, really big here.
Yes, anger. Lots of anger.
A really big guy.
I think he's innocent. I really think he's innocent.
I'm getting the impression of a really huge man, a big guy who's totally bald, very muscular. But I don't think that in life he was human. I see him as a spiritual presence.
Elemental?
Possibly. And at the moment I see him in the woods coming through like this. Please, could you come to us? Could you give us a sign of your presence, please? Could you make this device lights flash? It won't frighten me, I can guarantee you. But it will tell me that you're here.
Possible voice there.
Yeah, I heard something then. Or casting in the air.
I'm just feeling so much anger here. I really am feeling anger. Severe anger. If you're angry with the way how you were treated, could you put the lights on, please? I feel you were innocent. I feel you were present. Let us know if you're innocent or guilty. Were you innocent? It's a voice. Jesus, I'm feeling sadness now. I think you're innocent, weren't you? Is that why you were here? You want to prove your innocence? Don't know if these voices I'm hearing are actually here or whether they're down the road, but I'm hearing lots of voices.
I can't say, I mean, you mentioned you heard a voice earlier, which I can concur with, but I'm not actually hearing anything else. I can hear the traffic, obviously.
These are mumbles and they're coming from that direction. Not the way how they would have actually come. I think the trackway would the way how it had been brought up here was from that way where my camera was.
And the trackway is exactly where we walked, yeah.
Yeah, this is coming from the other direction.
That would have been the original road.
Come closer. Can you touch the lights? Try and touch that light with your hand. It won't hurt you. It's just to let us know that you're here. We might be able to... crap, sadness is gone, but I'm getting anger again. Just feels that's in my chest right there, and it's really
it's awful.
Really heavy. Right in my chest. Okay. You probably saw me look up a little while ago and just trying to make sure that weren't coming from the little light at the K2. Nothing. At one point behind you, just over there, was one great big huge light for a few seconds, just appeared and then went.
Oh, right.
If that's what you saw, I don't know.
I saw a white flash on the railing.
Yeah, this was for a few seconds, and that was just a pure white light.
I think it's about, I'm feeling energy, but it's not being very cooperative.
Just getting so much anger. And sadness.
Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me your name, please? Something there, isn't there? There's definitely something coming across. Are there any country folk here, please? Can anyone tell me your name, please? Did you know a Chris? Or a Mr. Reed? Chris Reed? Did you know him? You had so much anger earlier on. Why were you angry? Why were you so angry? Please. Ellie. Were you innocent? Could you say what your name is? Are there any bad people here? Are there any nice people here?
Probably not. If you don't let us know, we're going to have to leave in a little while. Really to see if you can let us know before we actually go. Use your voice.
This is part of the problem with these type of investigations. We've got the ghost box on the ground, we're recording, we can hear some of the audio but not all of the audio. So until I've actually reviewed the video that we've captured here and the audio, we won't know what has been said directly. We can get one or two indications. At the moment it appears to be dying off. There doesn't appear to be that level of cooperation.
Come on. Gonna have to leave now, so you've got your choice.
The light will be wearing down.
You've got your chance to let us know. One way or the other. Are you innocent? Were you guilty?
No, it's not getting anything now.
No.
Let me just kill it on here.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been here now for the best part of an hour and a half. We did 40 minutes of camcorder and then of course the ghost box session. It'd be interesting of course to know what we picked up, if anything, but as always you'll be the first to know before we do. But I can say it's been quite an interesting experience. It's a bit chilly, it's not as cold as it has been previously, but it's cold enough. There was certainly life about in the wood. We can hear various different creatures moving around in the undergrowth, but we're not seemingly picking up a great deal of activity from spirit, although there is some, as far as I'm aware, there are some recordings there from spirit which hopefully I can elicit, and of course you would have heard. But I thoroughly enjoyed being here tonight, and of course now it's time to make my way back to drop Eddie off and then return once more to our home. Coming very soon, we're going to be joined by Ursula Bielski.
Yes.
And we're going to investigate Santon Church. She's never been there, so she's quite excited. Sean Kim is also coming on board with his friend Paul, and he's going to join us too, also at Santon. And so there will be probably 2 investigations which will be combined into one source file, which I'll be sharing to you probably around about Christmas time or thereabouts. But in any case, can I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us here tonight on this grand investigation of the crime attributed to Jonas Snell and the punishment which was meted out to him. Very quickly finish off. Is there anything you want to say, Eddie?
Yeah, I've had this real tightness, anger, and that has felt so strong right the way through. And I don't know where that's actually come from.
Well, you think you've heard voices as well?
I've definitely heard voices. Definitely children. Church bells were normal. I mean, so it's obviously someone just ringing the church bells.
Yeah, that.
But apart from that,
not a lot. But it was worth.
Yeah,
it was worth the visit. It was worth the attempt in any case. But thank you very much for joining me tonight, Eddie.
No worries.
Thank you very much for joining us here tonight at Potsford Gibbet in the county of Suffolk, and not far from the town of Wickham Market. And I look forward, as with Eddie does, to seeing you again soon. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
My story today concerns a church with a very ancient legacy, in fact allegedly with connections to Satan himself. A church with a very, very weird tower, so strange in fact that there is no other church in this country that shares a similar design. And a church with a very, very controversial family, whose surname was given to the English language to mean something quite unpleasant. And also perhaps a connection to the Irish Revolution in Easter 1916. In the land of Chaucer and Shakespeare stands many medieval churches risen with tall lofty spires. are imposingly grand towers, hewn from native stone, flint or brick. And from any town or village, their presence breaks the dullness of modern compliance to an age where England flourished through profitable commerce and trade, which allowed the rich merchantmen of old to build these amazing edifices in honour of their own mortality perhaps, and the absolute certainty of an eternal resting place to quietly slumber through the ages of time. Such a place is St Mary the Virgin at Burgh St Peter in Norfolk, an imposing structure built of English brick and flint, and dressed with the mellow colours of a neatly trimmed thatch roof, since being built in the years of Chaucer from around 1300 onwards. And huddled around its haunch walls lies centuries of congregation, buried like huddled masses which each period of history represented by fading stones etched with a lifelong past, and as with most churches, an uncertain future as man and nature move forward into a new eon. Standing but a few hundred feet from the River Waveney, it lies almost lost to time on a small plateau, looking out across the valley below, and seemingly away from the mindset of a modern world that has sailed on by. The church was altered and added to during the era of Shakespeare, but lost its original tower around the year 1600. It is believed that an earlier and long-gone church had stood in the village since Saxon times, but no trace of it exists today, other than that recorded to parchment of vellum. And by the time Samuel Boycott became rector of the church in 1764, the church was in much need of renovation, and so he decided to kill two birds with one stone by rebuilding the tower on the base of the earlier one and turning it into a family mausoleum. The names of those interred here and also within the churchyard are carried on brass plaques affixed to the pulpit, which was built by his son William, another rector here, in 1816. The tower, as can be seen, is peculiarly unique and a prime example of Georgian Gothic. The inspiration of its design originally came from William, who saw ziggurat temples in Mesopotamia during his grand tour. The tower is loosely based on this concept and was originally finished with a towering finial, which had all but disappeared by 1920 when this photo was taken. There were no access points to the roof of the tower, and so if a flag being needed to be flown, one of the choir boys would scale the outside of the tower to raise or lower it. It's not known if any died, but I'm fairly certain that there must have been many casualties. In 1841, the Boycotts, who had descended from French Huguenot stock, had decided to change the family name to Boycott, a name which became rather notorious by the end of that century, and also for its use as a new word in the English dictionary. The Boycotts managed to retain the living of Burgh St Peter for over 150 years before the last rector, William Douglas Boycott, left the church to take a new post in 1899 at Wymondham in Norfolk, and he died in 1932. But my tale today concerns not any of the church clerics, but of Samuel's great-grandson, a Charles Cunningham Boycott, who took a very different route to that of his family, by preferring a career in the military instead. It is said, whether this is true or not I cannot say, that in the English landed gentry the smartest sons entered the church, and the less academically gifted offspring joined the army. Perhaps Charles was a case in point. In 1848 he entered the military by attending the Royal Military Academy in Woolwich, where he hoped to join the Corps of Royal Engineers, but was discharged from the academy in 1849 after failing a periodic exam. His family were then forced to take the well-trodden route of buying him a commission as an officer in the 39th Regiment of Foot. His first and only posting was to Ireland, where he married a local woman from Dublin in 1852. He then sold his commission to remain in Ireland, where he leased a farm in County Tipperary, where he acted as a small-scale landlord. In 1854, after receiving an inheritance, he moved to Achill Island, off the coast of County Mayo, where he leased 2,000 acres of land. Boycott soon ran into trouble with the locals, He was accused of interfering in an election and also of looting a wrecked ship which is stranded on the island, where he was alleged to have removed the goods to his farm. Boycott's true personality was to come to the fore from 1873 when he moved to Lochmask House, which was owned by a wealthy absent landlord, Lord Erne, and is 4 miles from Ballinrobe in County Mayo. Here he agreed to be Lord Erne's agent for 1,500 acres he owned in County Mayo. One of Boycott's responsibilities was to collect rents from tenants on the land, for which he earned 10% of the total rent due to Lord Erne, which was around £500 each year. According to author Joyce Marlowe, Boycott had hardened in his attitude towards the Irish following his somewhat fraught experiences on Achill. He certainly acted in a very contrary manner to the people employed by him and was suggested to behave as he saw fit, and that's without regard to other people's points of view or feelings. Examples of that attitude were manifested by his unpopularity with his employees and tenant farmers, and becoming a local magistrate only agitated that attitude. He was accused as such by not allowing gates to be left open and not allowing hens to trespass on his property, and that he fined anyone who transgressed these restrictions. He also had withdrawn privileges from the tenants, such as collecting wood from the estate, and by August 1880 his labourers went on strike in a dispute over a wage increase. Tenant farmers were generally engaged on a 1-year lease and could be evicted at any time, even if they had paid their rents. Some of the tenants were large farmers who farmed over 100 acres, but the majority were much smaller, and on average between 15 and 50 acres. Many small farmers worked as labourers on larger farms. The poorest agricultural workers were the landless labourers who worked on the land of other farmers. In October 1879, Michael Davitt, the son of a tenant farmer, formed the Irish National Land League. The Land League's aims were to reduce rents and stop evictions, and in the long term to make tenant farmers owners of the land they farmed. Davitt asked Irish nationalist Charles Stewart Parnell to become its leader, and in 1880 Parnell was also elected leader of the Home Rule Party. On the 19th of September 1880, Parnell gave a fine speech in Ennis, County Clare, to a crowd of Land League members, where he suggested that in their dealings with the landowners that they should be ostracised and completely ignored at every opportunity, and leaving them in a moral Coventry. Boycott's problems with striking labourers were about to go global following Parnell's rousing speech. In the same month, Lord Erne's tenants were due to pay their rent. He had agreed to a 10% reduction owing to a poor harvest, but all except 2 of his tenants demanded a 25% reduction. Boycott, as agent to Lord Erne, was placed in a very difficult position. Boycott said that he had written to Lord Erne and that Erne had refused to accede to the tenants' demands. He then issued demands for the outstanding rents and obtained eviction notices against 11 tenants. 3 days after Parnell's speech in Ennis, a process server and 17 members of the Royal Irish Constabulary began the attempt to serve Boycott's eviction notices. Legally, they had to be delivered to the head of the household or his spouse within a certain period of time. The process server successfully delivered notices to 3 tenants, but a 4th, a Mrs. Fitzmaurice, refused to accept the notice and began waving frantically a red flag to alert other tenants that the notices were being served. The women of the area descended on the process server and the constabulary and began throwing stones, mud and manure at them, and succeeded in driving them away to seek refuge in Lochmask House. They tried again the following day, but were again unsuccessful. By now news had spread and many people descended on Lochmask House, where they were able to drive away the servants either by choice or by threats. Eventually all employees, whether working in the house or on the land, had left, and Boycott was under pressure to bring in his own crops and without any help. Within days, every trade, shop, business refused to serve Boycott. This left him to import his own food from outside the district. In frustration, Boycott wrote to the British Times newspaper and gave an account of the situation he was experiencing. The Times dispatched a reporter who interviewed Boycott and reported that he had £500 worth of crops that would rot unless he could find people willing to help him. Boycott also reported that he had been told to leave. The British national newspapers rallied together and raised over £2,000, a huge sum of cash for 1880, to finance a party of men to travel to Boycott's estate and to bring in the crops. Very shortly, things became a lot worse as a result through the Boycott Relief Fund that was prepared to send armed men to help the workers bring in the crops. These men, being Protestants of the Orange Order, had very little empathy with the Catholic majority, and the Irish saw this expedition as an invasion. The British, wary of another sectarian war, quickly quashed the armed expedition and instead offered a military escort to allow 50 unarmed workers to remove the crops. These men were drawn from the Protestant minority in County Cavan and County Monaghan. Boycott said that he only needed 15 labourers as he had brought in the grain crop himself, and rumours abounded that willing labourers would be attacked, but nothing came of it and the root crops were harvested. The entire cost of providing escorts and transport to remove the harvest cost the British government £10,000, and in Parnell's words, it was 1 shilling for every turnip dug from Boycott's land. Boycott later claimed that he himself had lost £6,000 of his investment in the estate. And finally, on the 27th of November 1880, Boycott, his family and a local magistrate were escorted from Lochmask House by members of the 19th Hussars. A carriage had been hired for the family, but no driver could be found for it, and an army ambulance and driver had to be used. The ambulance was escorted to Claremorris railway station, where Boycott and his family boarded a train to Dublin, where Boycott was received with some hostility. The hotel he stayed in received letters saying it would be boycotted if Boycott remained. He had intended to stay in Dublin for a week, but Boycott was advised to cut his stay short. He left Dublin for England on the Holyhead mailboat on the 1st of December. By now the term to boycott had been given to the English language. The idea arose from a meeting by Father O'Malley in a discussion with a British-American journalist named James Redpath. O'Malley was very much involved in Land League reforms from the outset and believed that using the term ostracise may be too hard for the local peasantry to understand. But by replacing it with the verb boycott and referencing the current climate, people would understand. And so the hapless Charles Boycott inadvertently perhaps gave his name to the English dictionary, where the term is often used today to describe industrial disputes. And the word also entered the lexicon of languages such as Dutch, French, German, Polish and Russian. And what of Boycott? Well, despite visiting New York incognito as Charles Cunningham, his arrival in New York generated a great deal of media attention, and the New York Tribune said, "The arrival of Captain Boycott, who has involuntarily added a new word to the language, is an event of something like international interest. He stayed a few months visiting friends and then once more returning home to England, where in 1886 he became land agent for Hugh Adair's Flixton estate in Suffolk, England. He remained in post until the 19th of June 1897, where he died suddenly at his home in Flixton, aged 65, and following ill health, with his body being buried back home in the churchyard at Burgh St Peter. Boycott may be long gone, but his actions back in Ireland in 1880 may have laid the template for Irish Home Rule, and by 1922 the Irish Free State was formed after the British left the southern part of the country to retain the northern counties of Ulster instead. By 1937 the Irish Free State was renamed the Irish Republic, which remains today. Burgh St Peter may be a beautiful place, but the church and grounds has a distinct feel that many have reported after visiting there. During my time at the site, I wandered freely within the church and cemetery and felt at every moment there was someone or something very close by. The sensation is not ugly or dangerous, but it is an energy that is palpable. It offers no threats, but a simple curiosity for anyone who visits. And yet this isolation does not remove the church from the outside world, for nearby is a river centre and parking for caravanners or boaters. But for the many who stay there, the church is something of an oddment that exists at the end of the trackway. And in some ways it feels deliberately so, despite the church tower being omnipresent to the locality. And there are no recorded ghost hauntings that are shared, but there is an ancient story that suggests the origins of the church. According to legend, it would appear that in the year 1101 AD, a man named as Adam Morland sold his soul to the devil for a very substantial sum of money, after which he left the country, where many years later, on his return, he erected a church at Burgh St Peter, on the foundations of which the present church was built. A few days after the church had been consecrated, Adam died and was buried in the churchyard with full religious rites. Now for some time prior to Adam's death, an old man had been seen around the village, clutching in his hand a roll of parchment and speaking to nobody. On the day of Adam's funeral, this old man was seen to become very excited and followed the cortege to the church, but would not enter. As Adam's body was lowered into its final resting place, the old man was heard to swear that he would wait until the day of resurrection to collect Adam's soul. That night, when the sexton went to lock up the church, he saw the old man was still there, and so asked if he could help. The old man slowly lifted his head, and the sexton saw to his horror that within the hood which the old man was wearing, a hideous grinning skull glowing from within. Terror-stricken, the sexton fled to the village to find the priests, both of whom returned to the church, armed with crucifixes and holy water. As they approached, the hooded skeleton stood up and vanished in a flash of flame, leaving behind the stench of brimstone. Every year after this incident, on the anniversary of Adam's death, that terrible hooded figure was seen outside the church. When the old church was rebuilt in the 16th century, it was assumed that the apparition would no longer appear. However, this was not to be, for now not only did the hooded skeleton appear, but so did a host of others all around the churchyard wall. It is said that this awful apparition can still be seen on the 2nd of May each year, the anniversary of Adam Morland's death.